If things happened and you needed to be in that energy, you wouldn't know what to do. And so I think a lot of people misunderstand the warrior in that the warrior is also being present. The warrior has to be present. The warrior is connected to life and death.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wondering Where the Lines Are. I'm your host, Brandon Lawrence, and I'm excited to have you tuning in. I'm a man who has undergone many different phases of evolution and change in my life, from growing out of low self esteem, to finding my truth in who I am, and finding the courage to take the ultimate steps to embodying and living that highest personal truth. I am passionate about spiritual evolution and growth and want to help foster more of that in the world. This podcast is aimed mostly towards helping men abandon the dysfunctional and limiting paradigms of typical ideas around masculinity, while honoring and exalting the greatest attributes of it. My goal is to have powerful conversations with many different types of men from many different backgrounds. We'll be talking about healing, trauma, courage, authenticity, business, adversity, confidence, insecurity, love, lust, and many more. We will be getting raw and vulnerable sometimes, and don't seek to run away from our emotions, like we men struggle often to do. Rather, we want to allow others to become more authentic and in touch with themselves, in order to help the world heal and grow by exalting masculinity to its highest and truest nature, the royalty of a line.
Let's do it, brother.
All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to Wondering Where the Lines Are. I have my new guest, Oliver Fehlandt, and I'm very excited to delve into this episode because we're going to be talking about the four sort of mature masculine archetypes and kind of get into depth about how there's a lot of boy psychology in our society and how a lot of the initiation and ritual processes of ancient cultures have been kind of lost. And that's resulting in a lot of problems today, of the immature shadow masculine. Some people call it toxic masculinity, but I don't like that term because it just automatically implies masculinity as bad. Um, so why don't you just introduce yourself, Oliver, on kind of who you are, what is the work that you do, and how you got into doing the work that you do, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brandon, for inviting me on. Super excited about this conversation and topic as men's leadership is super important, especially now, today's world. And so I used to be a personal trainer turned transformational life coach. And what I really do is help people to uncover the unconscious beliefs and emotional wounds that stem from the past and help them heal those so that they can step into and integrate more peace, more presence, more of their power, and really get, excuse me, really get what it is that they want with more ease. And usually that comes from them getting out of their own way. And a lot of what I teach is connecting back to self-love. You can almost say I'm a self-love coach just because all the work that I do is getting back to the love that's within all of us. And I think this topic is really important. And that work is even more important for men who are at times out of touch with their own hearts, out of touch with their own emotions and their own love because they learn to put on that shield, put on that armor. No, I can't, I can't do that. I can't have these emotions. I can't be all lovey-dovey. I can't, the connotation of what love is. So that's kind of a synopsis of the work that I do, whether it's women, helping them with their masculine wound, right? Because again, it's kind of funny. It's like men have wounded women just as much as men have wounded men.
Yeah.
And so again, this work all comes back to helping us heal both our inner child and the parts of us that are just looking for safety. So
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Yeah, I like that what you kind of touched upon is like men have harmed women, psychologically, physically, of course, but mostly psychologically. And that's not to say like, oh, men are the only problem, but men have harmed men as well. And that comes from, kind of tying back to the what this podcast is all about is like harnessing the fullness of the masculine archetype. So there's a part of the feminine in that as well. Like you said, getting in touch with self-love and emotions. I mean, one of the archetypes is the lover, of
yeah,
the mature masculine. And it's funny because in the book, kind of in the beginning, I highlighted it, see if I can find it. But basically, they were talking about how there's the kind of feminine counterpart in man and masculine counterpart in women, the animus or the anima. I think I'm
yep,
butchering it. But yeah, I mean, we it's important to kind of embody what we typically know as masculinity, like as the king archetype or the warrior archetype, because that is kind of being attacked today as like harmful and shameful. But at the same time, if you're just in touch with the king and the warrior and even the magician, but you have all the shadow aspects of the lover and none of the mature aspects of it, then you're going to be out of touch with what it is to be a true masculine figure, like a true, complete masculine figure. And that's going to be very harmful for not only others, but for yourself, right? So,
yeah,
thank you for your introduction. That's beautifully said. I think the work you do is really important. I've I've witnessed it firsthand. Um, we can get into that maybe in a little bit. But yeah, why don't we delve into the archetypes a little bit? Because I think this is really fascinating and people are really gonna appreciate all that this is. Why don't we kind of go through each of the archetypes and kind of you give a synopsis on how you understand it, and I'll kind of give you my take on it as well, and we'll kind of go through it. Is that cool?
yeah, yeah. And if you have I don't know where my book is somewhere, but why don't you pull out the page with the all of the different pyramids?
Yeah,
Right, it has like a which picture I'm talking about. Just because it's been a little bit since I've read the book, and so
sure.
I understand I don't know all the words of the shadows for each type, so we can just have
Yeah,
that in
I got it.
context.
I got it up here. So just starting with the king, right? We have the king in his fullness. And well, here's the book. And you probably can't the viewers probably can't see it well, but I'll see if I can like post something um later on. But so for the king, there's kind of a pyramid, right? So at the top you have the king in his fullness. And then on the bottom half, you have like kind of two poles of what the shadow polarity of that is. So you have kind of like the active positive pole and the passive negative pole. And so the active pole would be the tyrant, and the
Yeah, like
negative pole would
overactive. So
be
this is
the
like
weakling.
the overactive side of the king, the
Yeah.
king in, right, the king and his grandiosity, and then the other side is like more of this passive. And so we can also tie into anyone familiar with anxious attachment or avoidant attachment styles. Attachment styles can also be kind of represented with this. Like the anxious attachment is sometimes looked at that like over giving, over energy, right? That would be the one side, the positive pole. And then the avoidant, which is more of that like passive
Mm.
attachment style, is going to be that like negative pole on the shadow side for each of these archetypes. So so we have the tyrant on the overactive.
Yes. And the weakling on the kind of passive, inactive
Yep.
side. Um, and I guess we can go into the others as we get to them, but I guess how would you describe the king in his fullness? And then how would you describe kind of the tyrant and the weakling as you understand it?
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of tie it into as much of like personal examples
Yeah,
and just like examples of like the world, like try to make it tangible for people to understand it. So there's also the boy psychology underneath that. But let's say that that has evolved, and that now you're in kind of the actual king energy, but you're oscillating between each side. So The king in his fullness is going to be really someone who's has a vision, has a vision. Like this is vision, this is purpose, this is being able to see the future, project yourself out into the future, have that long-term gratification, right? So you're avoiding short-term gratification because think about a king. A king has a kingdom that he wants to take care of. So a king is also generative. He is generating more than he is consuming, right? That means literally you're making more money than you are spending. Is going to be king energy. You're likely saving. So this is also tying into finances. So a king is someone who's one. Just think about an actualized king, someone who's calm. They're calm. They trust themselves. They have purpose. They have vision. And the king energy really is the connection to God, our Father who art in heaven, right? So
Right.
if we think about that, the King of Kings, right, is that energy of generation, that energy of love, that energy of abundance. So a true king knows that this energy of giving, this energy of abundance, this energy of creation for others, for his kingdom, is not of his own. Because the tyrant sees it as his own. The tyrant sees it as this grandiosity. I'm the king, and he rules with power and fear because he's afraid,
Mhm.
right? And so we look at this as well. What happens when a man is wounded and because of fear from his past, he's trying to control because really he's afraid that if he lets go of control, then he won't have power. So he thinks power comes from him being a tyrant and being abusive in his relationships, being likely having anger that is a common theme for him. Right? Everybody has that. Everybody maybe knows that person, whether it was your
Yeah.
father or your brother or just some man in your life or that you've met or stranger that you see on the internet who's kind of representative of a tyrant. Right? That doesn't. I don't have trust in you because you're too overbearing and you're trying to rule with fear. And then the weakling is really almost again that avoidant, almost like I'm not going to do anything. Like
Mm.
I'm lazy. I'm a lazy king. I would almost say that you could see like Robert Baratheon in Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is like a really great example for some of these
I was
archetypes.
just thinking of that in my head.
Yeah, because you can see so Joffrey is the tyrant. That's a
Yeah.
tyrant. But Robert Baratheon, as he was in his kind of downfall, like that was kind of what was happening. He was kind of going into the weakling of just like gluttony, like just abusing his power in a way of like not really doing anything.
Yeah.
Right. So we can see how both of those happen, and we can see how like I would say Ned Stark. I'm trying to remember all the names.
Yeah.
Ned Stark, he was really he really had amazing king energy, almost to a fault, right? He was so honorable that he got killed. But
Yeah.
almost like
Spoiler
wasn't
alert
really
for
his
anyone who
fault.
hasn't seen Game of Thrones.
Ah, didn't hear that. But it's been out so long if you haven't seen it. Well, he doesn't die. It's okay. All right. So those are good examples if you've seen the show. So understanding that the king energy is almost connecting to a source higher than yourself. You're not trying to control through fear and force, and you're not completely abusing your power to the point of like not doing anything, just using it all for yourself, selfishness. They're both selfish and they're both, you could say, even generated from fear. So all the shadows are going to kind of have in some way being generated from the ego and fear. And that's why it's super important to get to the point where you're feeling more in your king energy. It's going to be responsibility, it's going to be leadership, it's going to be one personal responsibility for your life, and also that translating into responsibility for other people. So big like a part of the king energy is the father energy. So
Mm.
you now your responsibility is for other people. So really the king kind of actualizes when they're in that position of, oh, I'm now responsible for other people as well.
Mhm.
And it's not this over giving, but you just have, oh no, I'm responsible for other people now. I'm responsible for my wife and my kids. I'm responsible for this team and this business I have. I'm responsible for these people, right? So it's leading in whatever role that you can in creating that because that's what the king is. The king's responsible for his kingdom. He doesn't see himself as, again, he doesn't allow the grandiosity of his kingness to get in
Yeah,
the way of that, like his own humility
right.
of
Yeah, I mean,
why
the way
he's here.
they kind of pictured it in the conclusion when, I mean, they go through exercises in this book of like how you kind of stay in the, or kind of strive to the kind of higher full king in his fullness, like warrior in his fullness, is by distancing yourself, like your ego construct, from the archetypes and kind of channeling that energy and realizing that you're taking on that archetype not to own it and like identify with it, but to kind of channel it.
Yeah.
Because as soon as the king becomes a king for his own glory, that's when the tyrant becomes, right? It's like then it's almost the total opposite of what the true king is. You know, or he's striving, or how you said before, it's like when someone is living from fear and trying to be the king, they're actively trying to, manipulate others and to kind of control others rather than trying to liberate, free, and serve others, which is what the king
Yes.
energy is. So it's like the more the king, or the more the tyrant tries to become the king, the more he becomes the opposite, the tyrant. It's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And all the shadows are manifested through, again, uh, childhood
mm,
trauma, pretty much. Like evidence of either your father was a tyrant, you know, and he used fear and anger and physical manipulation, emotional manipulation, or he was a weakling. He never stuck up for himself. He never really was an example of what you would say, oh, like that's the man I want to become. And both of those examples, if you didn't have someone who was like really in their king energy, that you felt that certainty, that calmness, that confidence, and that safety, the container that a king can hold for his entire kingdom, both internally inside himself and for everybody else, because a king, a part of the king archetype is that he has his council of all the other archetypes. So it's like to be in your actualized king energy is to also be in, to have power within accessing all the other archetypes. Interesting enough, it's like it's, again, as you mentioned, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but in an upward spiral instead of a downward spiral. So that's why, again, the work of healing ourselves and connecting to these archetypes and understanding what shadow archetypes am I in, and am I also even just in boy psychology. I'm not even in a man, because there was never a point to initial, like there was never an initiation process for me to step into that responsibility. But I do think the responsibility side is, that can be its own initiation
mm,
into that, like, oh, it's not just about me, right? Because the boy, the I think it's like the, what is it, the Oedipal child, or the, I think that's the word. Um, there's the divine child. Children are very self-centered. Like it's just like that's, they're like, because a child, a baby, is given so much attention. It's like I am God. It's like,
yeah,
it's not
the
thinking that, but
terrible
that's pretty much
twos.
what's yeah, that's pretty much what's happening. So once you step out of that selfishness and you step into a selfless selfishness and you work on yourself, you take responsibility and you realize, oh wow, you know what? Yeah, I can make the world a better place by me being a better person.
That's great. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
always, we hear the cliche of with great power comes great responsibility. And I've always felt like you can kind of use the converse of that or the inverse. So it's just like if you give someone a great deal of responsibility, that can be a catalyst to take on the power of a true king. It's kind of like okay, now it's your turn to step up, the initiation,
Yeah.
the test, the trial.
Yep.
Um, yeah, that's great. And actually, since you brought up the boy psychology, because this is something that's kind of clarifying for me. I was associating the boy psychology with the kind of shadow archetypes, or are they different as you understand it?
The boy psychology is like there's an initiation into the mature masculine archetype. So just think like it's their archetypes embedded within the archetypes. So there's like a second layer deep. And sometimes people don't, like, I'll be honest, people, based on your past and based on how you grew up and the actual examples of masculinity that you've had, a lot of people are probably just still in the boy psychology. They never like graduated into the archetypes. So yeah, there's always like underneath each of the archetypes psychologically for us as well, those are playing out too. Because I think the divine child, the Oedipal child, like that is also that's like our inner child. That's our connection to like pure joy and bliss and love
Mm.
and source, even like that's the right, they talk about that. So those are also archetypes to be accessed as well. Interesting enough.
Yeah. I feel like I should introduce to the listeners kind of where these archetypes are coming from. So the authors of this book are Robert Moore, Douglas Gillette. Um, this is kind of adopted from Carl Jung or Jung. I
Hmm.
don't know how you pronounce it exactly.
I think Carl Jung.
Carl Jung. Yeah, he's one of the more famous psychoanalysts um, of the modern era. Um, And yeah, so these two men, Robert Moore, he's a psychoanalyst and professor of psychology. Douglas Gillette, he's a kind of a mythologist, an artist, and kind of also like a very spiritual kind of figure. Does some work in spirituality. So that's kind of where these archetypes are coming from, kind of adopted from Carl Jung's analysis and work. So I think that's a pretty good summary of the king in his fullness. We all can imagine that's part of, I mean, that's the most obvious and kind of arching, you could say, masculine archetype is that king. And you could
Yeah.
kind of say that the other archetypes complement and bring about that king energy. So another another more well-known and kind of more typically understood archetype of masculinity is like the warrior. So the mature warrior in his fullness is, well, we'll get into it, but just kind of at the bottom poles of the kind of shadow aspect, you have the sadist and the masochist. So why don't you go into how you understand the warrior and its shadow archetypes?
Yeah, the warrior has, interesting enough, been the archetype that I've most been learning to integrate.
Hmm.
It was the because it was the one archetype that wasn't um as comfortable or familiar for me. I
Hmm.
think probably because of the overbearingness of my father, it was like an aversion to it. So I would seek the feminine, I would seek my mother, my grandmother for safety. And so the warrior, that energy of fire just was never natural to me. The so obviously even just the words, right? We have the sadist and the masochist, right? And yeah, and that makes sense because I believe the sadist is deriving pleasure from harming others.
Yes.
So we can think about that as like overbearing warrior, over aggressive. I
Yes.
derive, and maybe it's not that the person is actually a sadist, like he does, it's maybe not that he actually derives pleasure from hurting people, but it's just out of his nature that he's hurting people.
Hmm.
And maybe he is finding control and power from that. So maybe he does enjoy it because he's so over on that other end of I need to control, hurt, abuse people.
Right.
And
Kind of
it's
like the
just almost bringing
fire,
me.
that spirit is kind of spilling over out into the world through his whatever, maybe it's aggression or whatever it might
Yeah, no,
be.
it's just aggression, right? And
Yeah.
so we can see that the both the in the king, the tyrant, and the weakling, that has hurt society. Leaders who aren't stepping up, even though they have power and money and resources to help, and they're not because they're just being selfish. That's greed, right? And then the tyrant of just wrath. Right. So we're thinking about the also the seven deadly sins. I also think of it as the seven human vices, seven human shadows, actually. Those are the shadows of humanity, and they're being played out in this. And so the sadist again is part of that tyrant of like just I mean, we can go into sexual abuse, domestic abuse, any form of physical abuse, that's going to be the sadist. And then we go into the other side, is the masochist. These are the people that likely, when you really fall into that shadow, like they're hurting themselves, whether it's through addiction. their own self-abuse. They're putting themselves in situations where they're just like, I deserve pain. And maybe even as we can say, like deep into that, like suicide. And it's masochist again, derive pleasure from my own pain. But that's really just because that's what I think I deserve and the safety. And, we can both go into those archetypes as like fictional characters. We see the warrior that's just like he just has joy in like killing and like he's a brute, right?
Yeah,
And then we have the masochist, which just like doesn't care. All right, I think we're back.
cool.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys.
That's okay. You were just kind of, yeah. I mean, we can get a little bit into the archetypes. I mean, in the book, a kind of figure that they use for the warrior. So it's complex and nuanced, right? So they talk about General Patton of the U.S. Army during World War II.
Mm,
Um, so he was like a very strong, for those of you who don't know, he was a very high general in the army, I believe, during World War II, was considered a hero, led troops into battle, very much embodied that warrior energy to kind of fight off evil, right? Nazi Germany. So the warrior is needed, like strength and power is needed sometimes, like aggression and even, violence sometimes might be necessary depending on the circumstance. But and so there was like that kind of he embodied to some extent the warrior in his fullness. But at the same time, also there is shadow aspects, such as like the sadist. So there's a popular film called Patton that kind of depicts him in war and his story throughout the war. And they talk about a scene where, I think the Nazis, there was like a battle and some of the Nazis surrendered and they had some prisoners or whatever. And they kill them, they kill the
yeah.
prisoners. And he says something along the lines of like, I don't know. I don't know exactly what he said, but some kind of like you could say as like a sadist, like he took pleasure in the fact that he conquered and killed his enemies, even though they were prisoners of war. Right. So that's him kind of
Yeah.
going too far, like, taking that warrior energy overbalanced and kind of spilling out into something that's evil in and of itself, like killing innocent prisoners. I mean, innocent, right? But prisoners of war, and that's technically a war crime. So, that's just one example that kind of helps to concrete what we're talking about. So it's a very nuanced conversation. It's not just like you're either the warrior in his fullness or you're expressing the shadow. We all have these archetypes of the true king, the true warrior, the divine sorry, the uh magician, the lover. Like that's the archetype of the masculine figure of God. There's the masculine and the feminine. These are two like archetypes of God. And so it's
Yeah.
inherent in every man to channel these archetypes. However, because we're growing through the ego, it's inherent that we also are kind of growing through and expressing some of these shadow archetypes at the same time. And the goal is to kind of ever increasingly refine yourself to embody more and more of the king in his fullness, the warrior in his fullness, the magician in his fullness, the lover in his fullness, and less of the distorted shadow aspects.
Yeah, 100%. You said that really well because it's not like, oh, I'm in my warrior and it's just I'm there. It's like, oh, I'm locked into that. It's understanding that those shadow aspects, again, this is part of the emotional work, the healing work. If you don't have the awareness of that and those are still playing out in cycles and patterns, then they're going to continue to do that. And even just having this awareness of the archetypes can help to notice, oh, where am I being overbearing or too passive in this? Because I do think the warrior is a very misunderstood archetype in today's world. I think
Yes.
it is, I think, I'll be very honest. I think a lot of people, a lot of men are still in the boy psychology. They're still like trying to get to the hero, right? And so we always talk about the hero's journey, and the hero is just the pinnacle of the boy psychology still, right? The I need to sacrifice myself for the world, for everybody else, right? The hero is that like savior archetype, but then you go further into the warrior, and that's a lot of what is missing for a lot of men today because it's not this overbearing aggressiveness. It is yes, being assertive, knowing what you want, getting what you want, and also do no harm, take no shit.
Yeah.
actually, because being harmless, not knowing how to, not being capable of violence does not mean that you're peaceful. It
Right.
just means you're harmless. This is a big thing talked about with one of my mentors that, yeah, actually training, maybe learning martial arts, learning how to throw a punch, learning how to getting in shape. It's part of the warrior, getting in shape, physically being capable to be violent, to protect, right? That's part of the warriors, the actual ability to protect. If you don't have the actual ability to protect, you're just harmless. You're not peaceful. You're just harmless. You don't if things happened and you needed to be in that energy, you wouldn't know what to do. And so I think a lot of people misunderstand the warrior in that the warrior is also being present. The warrior has to be present. The warrior is connected to life and death. It's like I don't know what quote it is, but I know it's from the samurai of waking up every day almost expecting death, expecting not like I'm going to die. So I'm going to live. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be here. And that's also extremely important again for the warrior to be present, to be in that fire, to be in that tension. And that's a lot of what has been missing, especially if we go all the way to like just specifically America, United States, Western society is this very like, oh, we're going to celebrate passive men, but then again, what happens? Passive men lead to what it was it good times
Yeah.
lead to weak men, and weak men lead to bad times lead to strong men. So it's like,
And then the strong
you
men
know,
create good times create weak men,
yep.
and the cycle repeats. Yeah.
And the cycle repeats. I don't know if it necessarily has to repeat if we're actualizing these archetypes, to be
Yeah.
honest, because it would be a recognition of it. But yeah, I think the warrior is the most understood type, both in its overactiveness and in its underactiveness. I think again, it's like it's being faulted rightly for people who are too in it, and then it's almost being celebrated or not being talked about enough for just men who know that they're too passive. You're weak.
Yes.
Being able to accept your weakness is the first step to strength, is the first step to actually being a warrior and having values, having standards, having on like knowing what you stand for is part of the king and part of all of these archetypes. Really, the warrior knows what he stands for, and he's not waging wars against other men, other nations. He's waging war against beliefs, ideologies, against the harm being done to other people.
Yes.
He's waging wars in a much different way. Battles are different. So I think we need more warriors who can
Yes.
be in the garden, not
Yes.
gardeners who are in the war type
Yes.
of thing.
I agree with you 1,000% on it. It's the most misunderstood. I certainly have misunderstood the warrior. Um, I mean, there's so much to dive in there. It's like there's no nuance in our understanding of the warrior, right? Either we see the warrior and we're like, oh my God, aggression, violence, that's bad. Men are bad. Or we're like, no, you need to be a man, right? Like, no, Mr. Nice Guy. You need to be an asshole and you need to be dominating. And it's like, no, no, there's a nuance to this. Like the warrior in his fullness is capable of violence and needs to be capable of violence and aggression and assertion when needed. But he's not just going terrorizing all the time. No, he's harmless. Doesn't mean he can't go into the warrior energy when needed, but he's not going to just harm for the sake of harming. It's a very
Or he's
balanced.
peaceful. He's peaceful. He's not harmless because he's capable of inflicting harm.
That's what he said. Yeah.
And yeah, and inflicting harm in a way that is because actually the most harmful you can be is to be harmless because you don't
Yes.
even know what to do. Like you'll actually hurt someone. But if you actually have the skills and practice, that's why I think martial arts is super important. Why is martial arts all about discipline and values? Why is most of like actual martial arts is really about mindset, about your character, and then the skills. It's not just like learn how to beat someone up because that's not, you're not a warrior. You're not the
Right.
warrior you think you are. because a warrior isn't going to actively cause harm. And the number one book that you can read about the warrior is The Art of Peace.
Ah,
Art of Peace by the creator of Aikido. I'm not saying, oh, learn Aikido, you have to learn Aikido, but you read this book and you'll understand what it actually means to be a warrior, which is the art of peace.
beautifully said. Wow, that's great. And as we were talking, I kind of just figured out. So I asked before about the boy psychology and what's the difference. So there is like the mature masculine and its shadows. So for the warrior, it's the warrior in his fullness as the mature masculine. And then we talked about the sadist as the positive and the masochist as like the negative passive pole. And if you go down into its counterpart on the boy psychology side, you have the hero, like you said before, like the
Yep.
boy wants to be the hero. He idolizes Superman and Spider-Man, and he wants to be that guy, that warrior. But it's a boy psychology. It's not mature. It's not. He doesn't understand that he has to discipline himself, and that it's about serving others, and it's not just about the glory and the fame of it. You know, it gets gritty sometimes. You know, and
Yes, but
then
he's not selfish with it, right? Like he's
right,
not the hero is actually in a way selfish,
right,
right? Because he's trying to gain that value from just saving others and almost sacrifice to himself.
right.
This isn't that's like kind of what a hero is. It's like I'm going to sacrifice myself for
Oh
everybody
yeah,
else.
they. Oh, I was just
Right.
gonna say they use like the example of Top Gun. Like he's this kind of big shot hero, takes a lot of super risky moves, um, and does awesome stuff. But at the same time, though, he's kind of being reckless.
Yeah, and that leads to other people potentially being hurt, and so that so we can see how that can be played out. Again, as we talked about that, this like I think the hero's journey is a beautiful representation of like going into that and then realizing, oh, it's more about that. And um that actually there's such a good story in the book that specifically talks about a a samurai, the story of a samurai and his like master gets killed, and then the samurai goes to get revenge and is a all right, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Sorry, we got this whole makeshift thing. Okay, I don't know where I left off.
you were just talking about you were going off about how it ties in like the warrior and the hero. There's like a good example.
Yes, yes. So the warrior and the hero. Again, the warrior is going to be the warrior is actually not selfish because the warrior is doing this for something greater than himself. He's also understanding the importance of honing himself, training himself, getting present, sharpening iron sharpens iron. So he's training too. This is also process of like training other men, being in training with other men as well, right? And that was needed again to protect. And you don't need to be a hero because a hero is actually selfish. Like, oh, I'm gonna go. Like, it's about me
Yeah,
actually saving, so people can see me and I can get the attention that I've been looking for and seeking. And there was this beautiful example of something similar to this, but it's just such a heavy example of like being really in that warrior energy. And it was about a samurai. I think you remember in the book. It's the samurai whose master got killed, got assassinated, and then the samurai goes and looks for the person that did that. He finds the person eventually and is about to cut them down and stops because because part of his values, part of being a warrior is I'm not going to cut you down out of the selfishness of revenge and spite that I have.
right.
And so he didn't to be able to exercise that amount of character to not kill the person that you want to kill because you know that that's selfish,
Yeah,
that you're about to kill this person with anger, with spite. And that's actually almost like not what the warrior does.
right.
And that story right there, I remember reading that. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's insane to be like. to let go of the ego so much in that moment. Like, no, because if I kill you, then I'm not killing you from actual actual place I know is true.
Yeah.
So I just won't.
That takes a serious amount of self-awareness and discipline to realize.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to read this part too, because it was funny
Yeah.
when I brought this up. I was just rolling through it because I knew there was going to be one that would work perfectly. And this came up. Listen to this part. The totally awakened warrior can freely utilize all elements contained in heaven and earth. The true warrior learns how to correctly perceive the activity of the universe and how to transform martial techniques into vehicles of purity, goodness, and beauty. A warrior's mind and body must be permeated with enlightened wisdom and deep calm.
Awesome, man. Beautifully said. Whew.
Very-
There's a lot coming in my head about all this that we're talking. Um, yeah, that's great about the warrior and the kind of immature spike of that pyramid is the hero, like we talked about, and then we have like the positive end of that is like the grandstander bully and the coward. Um, and maybe we can, maybe we don't have to. I don't think get into that right now. I think it kind of is self-explanatory. Um,
Yeah, we can be brief on that. Like, why don't you talk about
sure.
how that just give examples of that. I mean, even just the words, like give examples of that that anyone listening to this could relate to on, the playground and during
Yeah.
recess, and, in elementary school. Like
Yeah, there's a class. I
that's how
mean,
they were
it's even says it in
manifested.
the title, the grandstander bully. We've all known the bully in middle school, high school, elementary school. It's like that they're just they want to embody the hero because they're in their boy psychology. This is literally elementary school when you're a child, and they're just all about their self-aggrandizement, you know, trying to exercise aggression for their own self-worth, their own self-esteem.
Yeah,
And then you have
control.
on the flip side the converse, the coward that kind of just can't stand up for himself or herself and just lets himself be pushed around and does feel totally disempowered to access any of the hero energy.
Yeah, yeah, and we can see how both don't support anything. The coward doesn't stand up to the bully,
Nope.
and the coward is gaining control. Again, this is just like passive avoidant attachment is gaining control by avoiding. This is how I feel safe by like
Yeah.
not doing anything because I'm too afraid. I'm letting the fear shut me down. And then the other is I'm afraid, so I'm going to outwardly use my aggression for control. And that's why I'm going to read one more because one more
Yes.
came up. This is
Please do.
really important for the warrior. So, and this encapsulates what it means again to be in the fullness of the warrior, which again is probably the most like talked about archetype, I would say, besides the king, and at the same time the most misunderstood, right? I don't think most people maybe understand the magician and the lover, and we'll talk about those, and those
Yeah.
are very important. But I think a lot of people don't fully understand like manifestation of the warrior and its fullness. And so the way of a warrior is based on humanity, love, and sincerity. The art of martial valor is true bravery, wisdom, love, and friendship. Emphasis on the physical aspects of warriorship is futile, for the power of the body is always limited. So it's not just about being jacked, guys. For the people that are like, yeah, become a warrior and just like working out and getting jacked. Yeah, that's a piece of it, but just from hearing that, it's
Yeah.
that's always going to be limited.
Exactly.
Always
There's
going to be
limits to
limited.
your physical capabilities, and part of being the warrior, the mature warrior, rather than hero, is knowing you have physical limits. Like the hero disregards limits and wants to go be boundless and just do whatever. And it's like, no, you need to be humble enough to realize that you have limits as the warrior.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like perfectly said because you think about an actual battle. No, like the actual heroes did exist, but heroes as in like the stories we see of just one guy taking out everybody is is shown like there's very much an example of that. I mean, wow, beautiful stories. The Last Samurai. Last Samurai is probably a beautiful representation of just like the warrior.
That's a movie, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I'll check that
Have
out.
you seen that? Have you not
I
seen that?
no.
What? I'm pretty sure it's called The Last Samurai. I'm
Yeah, I've
thinking
definitely
of
heard
it
of it.
with Christian Bale, right? Christian Bale.
I'll check it out. I'll check it
I haven't
out.
seen. Oh my God, you gotta watch that like ASAP. Like this
I'll
week, like this weekend, watch it.
I will watch it for sure.
Yeah.
After this fire conversation, I will definitely watch it. Yeah, I mean, I can go on forever about this. I guess just one kind of thing to touch on is like when you were talking, when we were both talking about it, is like I just remembered about Spider-Man, like the
Mm,
original Spider-Man series with Tobey Maguire. So it's like
yeah.
if you recall, again, spoiler alert, but these movies have been out for a while, guys. Um, I think it's the third one where we see like the Shadow Spider-Man come about. And it's
Yeah, you're
because
right.
Spider-Man falls into the hero, way too much of the boy hero psychology. Like it becomes all about him. He's making out with the girl in front of the publicist, like, oh, look, they're all cheering for me. And then he
Hmm.
becomes susceptible to the venomous suit and to kind of potentiate more and more of that ego boy psychology and bringing him into more of the hero energy rather than the true warrior energy, which he's meant to embody.
Yeah, yeah. And was it in the third one or second one? He wasn't able to. He like lost his abilities. There was like a
Oh
period of
yeah.
time. I think that was the second one, right? Like he
Yeah, that was
lost.
the second one.
Yeah, he like lost his abilities. So that's also a representation of like the passive,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah. So they like these like the whole. It's really cool because the archetypes, right? If you heard of like the hero's journey, this archetype this archetypal journey was shown to be represented in so many stories. And so these archetypes are just like part of consciousness. And so if consciousness, right, if Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious, which is that like everything is recorded, and so everything that ever was and ever happened, ever talked about, thought about, created is like recorded in consciousness, and we all have access to that. And that's why these archetypes are even being talked about and studied and like being represented in dreams. And that's why we're seeing it. It's why they even like the theory of it is there is because there's evidence of it showing. And because all men at some point there was representations of the king energy, representations of the warrior energy, of the magician, of the lover. And so we can just access those like energy centers, access those I want to say like balls of consciousness. It's almost like how does an actor connect to a character? He connects to the consciousness of that character if he's really getting into it, right? And so the same thing happens for us is that we can almost be like actors and connecting to great, like how would that king energy of leadership, responsibility, calmness, certainty, like if I was a king in today's world, like how would I actually take about this approach? Or if I was a warrior in that. So it's really important understanding that we all have access to that. Like filling those buckets with different activities are important. But no, we can also go into the magician because we've talked about the warrior a lot.
Yeah, we have. And that's a good segue into the magician. Um, right. So, okay. So why don't we start then? Because now I realize we'll start with the kind of boy psychology of the magician archetype. So you have at the top the precocious child, and then you have the two kind of positive and negative poles at the bottom. The positive pole being the know-it-all trickster, the negative pole kind of being the dummy. Um, and I'll just briefly touch on like the mature masculine archetype of that, like the man psychology is the magician in his fullness. And then you have the shadow aspects like the positive pole, the detached manipulator, and then the negative pole, the denying innocent one. So yeah, I mean, feel free to, how do you want to like piece, take that apart? You can kind of talk about the boy and psychology first or whatever you want, but how do you understand the magician in his fullness and the shadow archetypes?
Yeah, the magician is definitely a really interesting archetype.
And by the way, these two archetypes, the magician and the lover, I feel like are, I mean, like the warrior is the most misunderstood one, but the magician and the lover, I feel like are almost regarded as irrelevant, like not even masculine, you
The
could
less
say.
known, I would say, not so
Yeah.
much misunderstood, just like the less known.
Right.
So it's not talked about, even though they're manifesting in very ways. And I would say that the magician is so the magician is actually the I believe the only introverted archetype out of the four. Every other archetype is a
Uh,
extroversion. So the magician is seeking inwards,
mhm.
seeking wisdom, seeking knowledge, introspection, gaining energy from the inside out. Whereas you could kind of say the other archetypes are more extroverted, so looking to the external and gaining energy. And so, yeah, I mean, I see the kind of like simplifying the over aggressive is like the know-it-all, like just someone who believes that they are better than everybody else for what they know, that they're smarter than everyone else, and they do in this very egotistical way. And you probably met someone like that. Like they're just like think they know it all. And so it's almost the ego's representation of like, oh, I know so much. I know so much. Uh so that can even manifest as like the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm trying to remember what it was called, but like the people who think they're smarter than they actually are. And so then that manifests. And then there's also people who are extremely smart, but they still use it in a way to gain power and control. So again, the over aggressive is always going to be this almost anxious attachment style of like I'm trying to gain power by controlling people through force, right? That's why it's the overactive. And then I would say the passive side is you almost don't it's like a lack of confidence in yourself and your knowledge and
Yeah.
your skills and your experience and your ability. So you just think you're dumb. And so you
Right.
maybe you don't even try. You don't even try to do anything because you just already wrote it off for yourself that you just can't do it. You just can't do it. And so maybe you also don't even explore like learning and educating yourself because you just played it
Shut
off
down.
that like, no, yeah, like I can't do that. And both types again, in a way are kind of this introversion. I would say the over aggressive side would be like the spiritual ego. They're
Yeah.
both the spiritual ego, both the spiritual ego of like, oh, like I'm better than you because I know more, or like because I'm more spiritual than you.
Right.
And again, that's just ego, right? Because the magician actualized in its fullness is almost like the magician is very interesting energy because it's also this like elder
Yeah.
shaman mystical energy. Like it's like the mystic. It's like think about in the village that there was like this that mystic elder that would do these like rituals maybe like in helping progress even further for the men to introspect in themselves and go through that self-discovery. So I think a lot of the magician is self-discovery. It's also gaining knowledge for the sake of knowledge, like learning more, expanding. I see the magician as connection to the ether.
Yeah.
It's a bit more esoteric, being able to take imagination and alchemize it into physical representation. So it's also manifestation. Magician is about manifestation. It is also about our mental skills of being able to influence the world through our mind and the mastery of that. And that's a really, I don't know, it's a really interesting archetype. I've seen myself very much I see that I've been in the magician a lot at times in my life where I'm just reading, learning. And if you're just reading and learning but not applying it, you might be stuck in the magician. You might be
Yeah.
kind of stuck in there and not applying it where the warrior can apply it. Or if you're struggling with bringing imagination into creation, you're kind of stuck in the shadow sides of the
Right.
magician too.
Yeah. I feel like I can relate to kind of being in the magician in his fullness at times, but then it kind of always s- steers to the like the overactive magician where you're just accumulating knowledge and not doing anything about it. You're not actually integrating the lessons you're learning. And
Yeah.
so you think you're more evolved or more wise than you actually are, and then something happens to humble you, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that was I wasn't applying what I was learning. I wasn't activating the warrior energy, like you said. I was being too much in the magician and not taking that wisdom and alchemizing myself, transforming it, and using that, applying it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Transformation. That's really, yeah, that's like because even just the word, the magician, you think of
Yeah.
like a mage, you think of like a Merlin, right? He's a wisdom, is part of the wisdom council to King Arthur. And that's kind of the same as the magician for us. That's why it's like, again, it's you're exploring almost like the spiritual realms, so to speak, is what I kind of see it as. But I also see it as the more of the mental play,
Yeah. Like
mental
honing your
mastery, and
craft, whatever your craft is. If you're a
yeah,
doctor
exactly.
or you just have a passion of woodworking, whatever, like you're like tapping into that energy of refining the craft and using experience, and you're tapping into intuition to kind of refine that and use the mental energy to lean into creating something new. It's creative in a way.
Yeah, yeah. The That's what I was gonna say as well. The magician, because we can see like it's almost like the magician is going to build the blueprint for something,
Yeah.
and then maybe the warrior is the one actually like laying the bricks
Yeah.
to build it. But like the actual creation of the whole, and then you could say that part of that's also the king, kind of tied to the vision of what is it like the overarching long term thing that we're seeing here. But the magician is very much creation. Like you're creating things out of nothing, which is from your mind creating things. So imagination into physical reality, and that's going to be part of the magician. And I like that you talked about intuition as well, because that's all again, it's like a bit of the ethereal, a bit
Yeah.
of the non-tangibles
It's
within
almost a little
the
bit of like
magician.
tapping into feminine energy a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, I would say actually, when we look at it that way, that the magician and the lover are kind of part of that
Yeah.
tapping into the other side of the feminine, but the feminine is imagination,
Hmm.
right? And the actualization of that imagination is the masculine. And it works in
Yes.
perfect balance of that, right? So the architecture of all creation is feminine, and then the physical representation of that is masculine. And so when we see that, then yeah, the magician is going to be a bit more, we could say this feminine energy, this introspective energy, this introverted energy. And I think a season for that is always important. But I would also say, again, this is where I see that some men are too, like they're just way too in the warrior and maybe even the king. And so they maybe made a lot of money, got a lot of success. Maybe you're in this position. You've achieved certain levels of success and achievement, but there's still something missing. You
Yeah.
still don't feel whole, complete. Maybe your relationships are lacking, so you're not really embodying the lover. Maybe your connection with yourself is kind of lacking. So, the magician is lacking there, and you're maybe in the shadow sides of either the warrior or king. And even if you aren't, there's still something likely missing for you because you've achieved all that success. It's easy for you to take action, but it's hard for you to slow down. So for
Mhm.
you, integrating the warrior and warrior, sorry, the magician and the lover is going to be most beneficial. Now, if you're someone, to be honest, like myself, just because I didn't have the right role models and through my own upbringing, it was difficult to take that action. It was more so the passive side for me that I fell into, the difficulty of like taking that action, that achievement, and building that. And so there was a lot of the magician and the lover, and we'll go into
Yeah.
the lover, which is a great kind of base to have as well. But now it's, so for other people, men out there don't have the career, the amount of money, job, purpose. Like you don't have the life that you want to live physically. Right? The outward representation of it isn't where you want it to be. So for you, it's about tapping into the king and the warrior because maybe you've been in the magician's soul. You've accumulated so much knowledge, you don't need more knowledge.
Yeah.
You need to go out there and take on the world. So I would love to hear your kind of take of the magician as well. Again, you've read the book most recently,
Yeah.
compared to me, so curious on your take as well.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of what you said. Um, I think about music. Like I used to write music, and that was like very much a magician energy. Like you're channeling, you're getting in touch with intuition. You're kind of almost reclusive a little bit more so than you normally are. Um, yeah, I agree with you. I feel like the magician and the lover are more of like kind of you could say feminine counterpart to the other masculine archetypes like the king and the warrior, but they're all the masculine archetypes. Like that's the paradox, right? Like we're all trying to be whole within ourselves. Um, and so like there's so much nuance, like I said when we were talking earlier before about the warrior being misunderstood. It's like people are either like you need to be totally a man and any kind of feminine thing at all is like, that's you're not being a man. And you need to avoid it. You need to avoid emotions. You need to avoid getting in touch with intuition. You need to avoid getting in touch with creativity, with slowing down. And it's like, no, not really. But then at the same time, though, yeah, the flip side of that is like, oh, you just need to be reclusive all the time and, just gain more knowledge. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to act. You don't need to be a warrior. And it's like, that's not true either. There
Yeah.
needs to be nuance, balance, refinement, and it never ends. It's a continual journey of evolution. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the
uh,
balance of being and doing.
yeah,
And even that, that's a whole nuanced conversation because
yeah,
I also believe that true being, I think
is
people
doing.
see being as like they're not doing anything. Is like, no, 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 being is the very essence that you are, and through that there a doing
You
happens,
do.
but you're not trying to do, you're just doing through
Doing
the being.
happens.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know.
There's
That
a
might go
Buddhist
over
saying it's
might go
like
over people's heads.
at the end of the day, actions get done and
Mm.
things get taken care of, but there's no doer of the actions. It just happens.
Of that. And that's what being actually means. And so I'd say we learn to tap into that in the within the magician. And I love how you said like isn't just like the spiritual realms, like it is just it could just be diving into your craft, just diving into specific specialized knowledge around anything. And then again, it's that just a bit of the introverted side of like going deep into something. Um, and also it's also going to be part of alchemy and creation, which is a whole kind of other side of that. But yeah, the
Yeah.
magician's really interesting. The book, The Magician Within. So there's a book for each of these archetypes that they wrote, and they're pretty. Some of the King Within and the Warrior Within, I don't think are as rare. You can find those,
Yeah.
but the Magician Within is, I think, one of the rarest. It's like
Mm.
hard to find. It's like $300 or something. It's like not easy to
Oh
find.
wow.
You go on Amazon and look it up. I'm pretty sure that's how much it was. Last time I checked, I was like,
It's kind of
why is this
fitting
one so
too for the
much?
magician archetype. It's like it's mysterious. It's hard to find. It's like very much synonymous with what the magician is. That's funny how that turned out.
Yeah, because again, it's the only introverted type, so it's a very powerful archetype to learn to master. Because I
Yeah.
think it manifests in ways where people lose themselves in it too much. They get too introverted
Mhm.
into themselves, and we're not going to go into like, are you extroverted, introverted? It's
Yeah.
just right. But
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, let's go into unless there's anything else within the magician you
No,
want to
I
talk about,
I agree. I
we
think it's time to
dive
segue
into the
into the
lover.
lover, which is probably like I said,
I think,
like you said, the warrior is misunderstood, and the magician and the lover are probably like not even known as like a possible archetype of masculinity. So we have
yeah,
on the boy psychology side, you have the edible, audible child as like the top of the pyramid, and then you have the positive pole being the mama's boy. We all know that, and the dreamer on the negative pole. And then you have on the man's psychology, the lover in his fullness, and then you have kind of on the positive pole, the addicted lover, or on the negative pole, the impotent lover. So I'll just kind of start with the way I understand this and the way it's been described. You have the lover is all about sensation and feeling and experiencing and leaning into the passion of life. I think passion is like a really good word to describe it. So like if you're totally in love with a woman, you're passionate about it, you're having passionate sex, or you're like indulging in like fine wine, or you're experiencing the heart wrench of like your loved one dying and you're just in that emotion in the thick of it and you just want to experience and just and jump into the experience of being and the emotions of it and the visceral experiences of it all. Um, So you can kind of see how on the positive side of that, it's like the classical addiction of like whatever addiction it may be. It could be a sex addict, drugs, anything, any kind of overindulgence, food. And we all do this. You don't have to be an addict to like every now and then you overindulge in eating junk food, for example. Um,
Yeah.
and then on the flip side, you have the impotent lover. So this is sort of someone that's kind of very much detached from feeling because you don't want to kind of feel the pain of something. You can kind of think of like classical depression where someone's like, yeah, I don't really know how I feel. I just feel detached. I just feel, I don't know, like think something's missing. And you can tell in their affect that there's just kind of no life in them. There's no juice. There's no vitality. Everything's
Yeah.
kind of just blah. Everything's kind of gray. Um,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your kind of counterpoints on that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that was really good
Yeah.
because that also made me realize I said the Oedipal child for the king. No, it was
Yeah.
the I think the
It's the
divine
divine
child.
child.
Yeah, the divine child. I knew it was somewhere. It does make me think how this actually brought me back to the warrior because it made me think how really good examples because this will tie in because I said like the masochist could be kind of like addiction in certain ways, but honestly, to just show the correlation, like the sadist of the warrior. It's a really good example for people. Like that's the person that scams people.
Mm.
Like let's talk about money. Like that's the person that's scamming people, trying to get money, and the masochist is someone who's leading to burnout, right? Like, they're taking the brunt onto themselves in a different way. So I'm also seeing that the and how that ties in is because no, the lover is going to be more of an example of that addiction for the passive side or the over aggressive side. Either like just this overindulgence of the pleasure, right? Because I see the lover as like the bard, the the musician, the artist, like it's the artist. Like I see as like the
Yeah.
archetype of the artist of what it means to like live your life like art and bring that into everything you do is that everything becomes art. Like even just drinking the wine and just enjoying yourself. I also see it as like your connection to nature. Like the overarching the like extreme example of it is like a hippie would be like someone who's
Yeah.
just in the lover and they're just in the lover and they're just in it and we love
Yeah.
everybody, we
Make
love
love, not war,
everything.
man. I just want to
Yeah,
lay in the
and
grass and smoke some weed and have sex all day.
no, that's exactly like make love, not war. But that person's harmless. That person's actually more
Yes.
harmful than someone who is actually embodied in the warrior and their
Right.
lover. Because they, again, someone who doesn't know how to control themselves, control their violence, so to speak, is someone who's much more harmful because they don't know how to exercise it. So like again, if you don't know how to swing a sword or shoot a gun, that person is more dangerous than someone who knows how to swing a sword and shoot a gun
Right.
and chooses not to,
Right.
right? So but the man, the lover is probably the most important archetype.
Yeah.
I think the king is because the king means you're like you're bringing all of them together, but the lover brings passion and life into all of the other archetypes. The lover
Yes.
brings all of the archetypes back to themselves for like why are we all here to do this is oh yeah to enjoy life to be
Yes.
here to be with life. It is funny enough I have another little book, Pocket Roomy.
You've got a lot of
So
pocketbooks,
the
man. Just like whipping them out in your pocket. That's pretty
I
cool.
know, just boom, boom. But Rumi,
That's the magician in you.
right?
But hey, I got a book for this. I got a book for that.
Yeah, exactly. And he was the cry of the soul in love with God has never been more eloquently expressed than by the great Persian Sufi master. I'm just gonna say Rumi because that first name I'm gonna butcher it. Readers have thrilled to his ecstatic songs of divine union for more than 800 years, and this is a collection of his poetry. And the reason why I say Rumi is because his is like the first poet, I guess, and writer that really brought this like passionate, sensual relationship with God and source and spirit. And then the way he talks about it is in the same way of like the embodiment of the lover. And so I see a lot of men who are just like far too in it. They're far too in the lover. It's like great that you have that, but you're not doing anything with it.
Yeah.
So you're not taking any responsibility. And then there's the other people, I would say the majority, there's a lot more men who don't have that connection with their heart.
Yes.
And the heart brings all the archetypes together into why we're doing what we're doing is oh yeah, because the love is the answer. And
Yes.
the lover isn't about being all lovey-dovey. It's that connection to life.
Yes.
And and that's why yeah, that's why I think the lover is actually one of the most important because that's going to be emotional intelligence. It's going to be
Yeah.
emotional regulation. It's going to be your ability to just have fun and be in play, be in joy, right? I think it's also like improv. I think like freestyle. You're able to like freestyle
Yeah.
because freestyling is all just being connected to the present moment and like not caring. So you're not in your head. You're just in this moment, just like creating whatever's being created with whoever you're with, and it's just like this beautiful ensemble of creation.
Yeah.
And so That's that's the lever. That's if more men tapped into that, we'd have a lot more healing going on because that's what's going to bring a lot of healing for the men who are disconnected to their hearts, disconnected to their emotions, and
Yes.
disconnected to life, right? So I think you actually talked about that, maybe expand on that more of that. Literally, as you said, like it's just gray. It's like you're doing everything you can, like you're living your life,
Yeah.
maybe in the king, in the warrior, in the magician, but there it's gray,
Yeah.
right?
Like it's
It's like have
just
a kingdom, like a boring kingdom. Like your kingdom's is boring. There's no bards around. There's no
right.
fun. There's no celebration. There's no like there's no passion within the kingdom.
Right. Like it's not like you're living life. It's kind of like life is just living you
Yeah.
and you're just kind of taken by of all this masculine energy, like all this warrior energy, all this king energy. It's kind of just ruling you almost. And like you're not tapping into the heart of what creation and life is all about, which is that lover energy, that visceral, like, I'm alive and I'm experiencing love and connection and expansion and joy and bliss and ecstasy. Um, you know, you kind of said something. Well, you said that the lover is the most important, and I agree with you in the sense that, and I think I know what you mean, but just to kind of clarify for the audience, like this show is all about tapping into that lover energy for men, because in our society, that's like probably the most deficient and most mis. Well, again, the warrior is misunderstood, but like the lover is like the least tapped into or even acknowledged as a man. Um, and that's kind of the heart
Yeah.
of this show is like tapping into that energy. So from that perspective, it is the most important archetype, but all these archetypes are the most important. Like there's no one is better
Exactly.
than the other. And I know you know that, and I know that's what you meant, but just to kind of clarify for the audience, like don't get it twisted. Like these are all interconnected. Like you just said, the lover brings them all together. If you're too much in the warrior, kind of going back to that example of General Patton, like you're extremely decisive. In the moment, you can make tough decisions under pressure and you can act. But if you're cut off from your heart, going back to the samurai, you will just slaughter your enemy out of revenge because you're not connected. Well, you could even say that's passion in and of itself, and that's kind of the shadow aspect of passion. It's like just like getting in that revenge energy. And but if you're not in that lover energy, if you're not tying in all these other archetypes, they're kind of irrelevant. What's the point? What is the point of life? This is the heart of life. And for a
Yeah.
lot of men, I feel like probably what can help as a great catalyst is a loving relationship with a woman because she's in touch with she's the feminine archetype. So she's helping you get in touch with your heart. And so a lot of men begin to kind of get opened up in their heart when they find love. But if
Hmm.
it's a give and take, right? Like you can't just rely on your external partner to potentiate the love within you because then attachment begins, right? Like you become too attached. And it's like you need to be in touch with the lover within first to a certain degree in order to be the best lover that you can be to your woman and vice versa. And it's a give and take. So that's the way I see the lover. And yeah, I just wanted to share all that.
Yeah, I mean you're totally right. There's no one most important archetype. I was just saying for the lover as like right now it might be the
Yes.
least integrated.
Yes.
But again, it's funny because if you're fully in your king, then you're technically fully in all of the other archetypes. And I will
Yes.
say, within the archetypes, I'll be honest, I don't think that all of them are kind of they're not all exercised at once.
Right.
Like they're being exercised in specific moments. And so it's more so like one, they'll just come out kind of unconsciously, but two, there can be like you're not, to be honest, you don't want to be in your magician when you're like making love to your woman. And you don't want to be, well, you don't want to be like fully in your warrior, maybe.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to be in that energy, but you no, you want to be in the lover in certain moments of time. Like you don't want to be in like the king when you're like in nature. Like no,
Right.
like you're in the lover because
Yes.
the king and the warrior have to be actually disconnected, kind of like that. Like the for them to be all that they are, there has to be not disconnected from themselves, but like I have to be detached so I can be what people need me to be in this moment. Like I have to
Yes.
not. It's not that I'm not empathetic, but I can't be in your emotions right now because I have to make decisions and be calm. So I need to
Yes.
hold the container. I can't be in with whatever is happening for you. I actually have to hold a safe container. And that's actually what masculinity is about is I'm not in it while you're in it because
Mm.
then we're both sinking.
Yes.
I'm able to hold space for you as you're in it and be able to calm the storm within myself and with whatever is going right now. I need to be able to actually handle the storm, right? I don't know if you can see it, but
Yeah.
like the ship in the back, it's like the ship is the masculine, the ocean is the feminine. And so if we're talking about that in like control and order and chaos more so, that masculine is bringing order and that order is holding this very safe container. And so how that comes to the lover is then this engagement of with life in that moment, in that present moment. And I can bring all that is in my heart, and that does help the other archetypes not be so disconnected. Because if you stay too deep into that, then you're just like you're not tapped in, and then you're wondering why all these things are happening, why you feel so empty, why nothing feels good enough, why you don't feel good enough, even though you've achieved and created so much so much in your life. You don't have the love, you're not enjoying it. And if you go too far over, you're just overindulging yourself with
Mm.
all the pleasures of the world and all the marketing of all the things that will make you feel great. But like the trueness of the lover is you don't need a lot. You don't need a lot
No.
to just enjoy it. It's like eating a grape and just like enjoying every bite
Yeah.
of that grape. Like as you mentioned, it's like having a glass of wine, but it's like enjoying every sip of that. And that's
Right.
why I said the artist. Like artists could write a whole story and poem, a whole there's so many, it's so visceral for an artist that they can create a whole masterpiece just on just that, just a glass of just enjoying a glass of wine. It could be like an entire song or painting or poem. Right. So I think that bringing that into our lives is so important. So
Mm.
important. And that helps connect all the other archetypes. So does that make sense? I'd love for you to talk about that too, of
Yeah.
maybe how, as you were reading it, how you could see that there's certain moments in time where you where you want to be in these archetypes because you don't want to be, you're not going to be a great father if you're in the warrior too much.
Yeah.
You want to be in the lover because the
Yes.
warrior has an enemy. You don't want your child to be your enemy. So you want to, and that's what happens, right? That's
Yeah.
why there's abuse because there needs to be an enemy in the warrior's mind. And guess what? That becomes your wife and your family and other
Oh.
people instead of, or it becomes yourself. That's the
Mm.
masochist. So it'll gotta have the lever integrated for you to be able to actually give that love to your family. You also need the warrior to be able to know that you can protect your family.
Yeah.
If you're not
Yeah.
running around throwing your sword.
Just I can picture them trying to protect themselves, whipping the sword, like ah.
Like there's no danger, please stop.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's not like like for example, when you were talking, I thought back to like I work. Well, I used to work. I'm trying to get back in, trying to find a job in critical care. I'm a physician assistant, so I worked in an ICU for 4.5 years, and you don't want to be in the magician when you have like three crashing patients at the same time and you have your phone ringing off and three different nurses are asking you for something. Like that's not the time to be in the magician or even the lover.
was gonna say
Or,
even the
you
lover,
know,
you did.
yeah. Like it, or if I remember when, you know, a young girl was going into liver failure and I had to explain to the mom what was going on. And my heart, the lover in me, wanted to sit with her and like just be empathetic and like just, she was breaking down crying and I just wanted to be there with her and soothe her. But the warrior in me was like, that we can't do that right now. Like we have to like
No,
be very almost cold and like tell her what's going on as a matter of fact. And then we got to get back into what the action is and we got to let the mom know and have a decision from her on what she wants us to do. So
yeah,
yeah, there's certain situations where you want to be, you know, in your warrior or in your king or in your magician and your lover. You want to be fluid. You want to have all these things available. All these mature archetypes are within you, and when the situation arises that calls for one, you are able to just freely allow that archetype to flow through you.
yep, yep, and that takes time. That takes practice. That takes both the emotional and psychological work of working through the shadows and how those shadows probably manifest in unconscious ways. And as you do that, and then you also start to practice and recognize and connect to these archetypes through visualization, visualization, meditation, and embodiment practices. Right. So actually, like I'm gonna, embodiment practice could be literally what I told you about. Like just do sprints, but do
Yeah,
sprints almost from this like energy of like, okay, I'm in my warrior. Like do hard, like the warrior really is an embodiment practice of the warriors. Do physically difficult things
yeah,
that are uncomfortable that you have to push through. The war, like David Goggins, that's the warrior. Like that's the
yeah.
warrior archetype is going to be David Goggins. The magician is, uh, I'm,
Yoda.
no, well, I'm thinking of an actual person. Not Stephen King, which he could technically kind of be in that. But Robert Greene,
Mhm.
Robert Greene. That's like a very intellectual side of the magician. We could also just look at like, indigenous like shamans,
Yeah.
like people that do like ayahuasca ceremonies, but like the shamans that have been doing it for a very long time. Um, King, interesting enough, I wouldn't say it's the full embodiment, but it is an expression of the energy, is Elon Musk. to
Mm.
to be honest, like a mass generation, massive jobs, money, and also even part of the king is fertility. Funny enough, he has a lot of kids.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wouldn't say he's in the fullness of all the other archetypes, but in a
Sure.
way, sometimes he is. I mean, he plays like video games, he makes jokes. Again,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would say for every man he's the perfect example of
Of course.
what to strive for, but it's just an example of like that is king energy. Like he's innovating, he's created jobs, and he's created an immense amount of money and prosperity. And it's just the funny the fertility part,
Yeah.
because he does have a lot of kids. And then uh the lover is, man, as I mentioned, like Rumi, is an example, a really powerful example. I guess you could almost say like Jesus would be like almost like the absolute embodiment of uh the lover. But yeah, I see it as the artist for sure.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of other stuff in my head to talk about. I think for a later time or something, because I'm just thinking about like I'm always fascinated with recently I've become very fascinated with like the different villains of cinema, right? So what comes to my mind is like
Mm,
the fall of Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader. And like after reading this book, I like see all the different like shadow aspects of the boy
yeah.
psychology that kind of like was made him susceptible to being manipulated into the, you know, the evil Darth Vader that he became. And it's just like so fascinating to me. And like even like the whole, I mean, for those of you that know Star Wars, it's like the Jedi are the warriors, but they're way too out of touch with the lover. So like when Anakin is like, I'm having all these fearful dreams, and he goes to Yoda for advice, and Yoda's just like, just don't worry about it. Detach yourself from emotions. You know, don't have attachments. And Anakin's just like, well, you're not even meeting me where I'm at. Like, how can you understand me? You're showing me no empathy. And so that makes him susceptible to Darth Sidious, who's like, "Oh, you poor Anakin, they don't understand you." They're kind of he's like stroking his ego, and it's just fascinating to see all that evolve. Um, I think maybe I'll do a solo episode kind of delving into that. Maybe we can come back in and talk about that, but I don't want to go
That would
too
be
too far down rabbit holes.
no, that would be really cool. That's actually a really good idea of like looking at these stories and trying to tie in the different archetypes because even like Lord of the Rings like
Yeah,
has very, very evident stories of that. Like Game of Thrones is very
yeah.
evident archetypes, and those archetypes are just over exaggerations of the archetypes, and they serve as really good examples of like what that kind of what it kind of represents, what it means. There's likely stories just based on the king energy, stories just based on the warrior, stories just based on the magician and the lover. But it's cool to see the manifestation of all of them because the book does talk about that it is rare for a man to be actualized in all of those archetypes,
Yeah.
like fully. But I think we're going to see a lot more people who are finding that because of things like this, because we're sharing the knowledge of it, and more men are coming to realize that just because you feel like there isn't the support that you need, and you have to be so much, there is help.
Hmm.
There is men's circles, there are groups popping up,
Yeah.
you know, and there's support for men now. And it's really just about men getting out of their own way to go and receive that support and know that yes, there are also women that I would say majority of women that really want to see that. And the women who haven't done the work and haven't healed, they're gonna be ones shaming and judging and
Hmm.
criticizing and being abusive in their own ways. But I would say the majority of women in the world are looking for men to step up, to heal, and to embody these archetypes because it will mean a better world for all of us.
Perfectly said. Couldn't say it better myself. Well, Oliver, I mean, you're about to launch a sort of men's group. For anyone that's
Yeah.
listening, why don't you kind of just give us the scoop on that and what it entails if anyone's interested, and how can they find out more about you, or just what's your Instagram, stuff like that.
Yeah. So Instagram is at Elevate with Oliver. And I am launching a men's group, which right now is collecting the founding members of it. So if you hear this, then you're one of the first people to hear about it, and either already have the founding members or you could be a part of that. But it's called the Brotherhood of Kings. It's about bringing men together, care about embodying this king energy together. Think about a round table, and we're all putting our swords together because we're all here to create better kingdoms, right? Which is your life, which is your wealth, your health, and your relationships. And it's a community where really the biggest thing is just you're, so to speak, sharpening your skills with other men. You have
Mhm.
a place that you can actually connect with other men, talk about what's going on in your life, where you don't feel like you can do that with other people. If something's not going as well as you really honestly want to admit, then you have a space to actually be open and vulnerable with that. Through that vulnerability creates deeper connections. Through those connections, you're also being held to higher standards so that when you come back around next week, hey, did you do that? How was that? How is that going? And so right, this is part of the warrior too, is that like you are becoming better because the mastermind effect of
Yeah.
being together, the collective consciousness that is created through that. So not only are there connection calls, there's healing breath work, there's visualization and meditation, as well as a mind, body, spirit personal app, something like workouts, habit tracking. So I'm kind of tying in all the archetypes within this community because, again, embodying the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover in their fullness will completely change your life and change the lives of all of those within your life that you're closely connected to. So that's kind of the purpose of the group is kings coming together to support each other in the generation and abundance of their kingdoms. And
Beautifully said.
yeah, really excited about that because uh, more leadership in men, self-leadership. translate it into external leadership is needed. So excited.
I'm excited too. Well, Oliver, thank you for this conversation. It was very fun and fascinating. I'm sure a lot of people liked it. Let's have another conversation sometime.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next one. Take care.
Peace, guys.